It's time for Let's Talk About It PSP, a public service program here on the Highway Gospel Highway 11. Sit back and relax while we share issues and answers and just all-around information that's going to help you here on Philly's first all-gospel music station, 1110 a.m., Gospel Highway 11. It's time for Let's Talk About It PSP.
And on this edition of Let's Talk About It, I'm Walt Cooper sitting in for Fred Blaine. February, of course, you know, is Black History Month, and as we continue, we have a very special guest with us that has a unique perspective as far as Black history, if you will, and the history of Philadelphia. His name is Attorney Stephen Scheller, and first of all, welcome to Let's Talk About It and Gospel Highway 11.
Sure, I'm glad to be here, and I hope I can elucidate on anything that's of interest to your listeners.
All right. Well, this, of course, being Black History Month, back in, I guess, the 60s and then the 70s, that was a big fight for even getting black studies in high schools or public schools, universities, and you were a part of that fight here in Philadelphia, so why don't we start there? Tell us about that struggle.
It was almost the beginnings of the teaching of black history in our schools. Mm-hmm. In 1967, I was a very young lawyer, and there was a big demonstration by African-American students in the Philadelphia school system at the Parkway here in front of the Board of Education, which was located there at the time.
Okay.
And they wanted to have black history taught in the schools and be treated more fairly and have a better education system, because the schools in Philly, as compared to the money that was spent on schools in some of our suburban districts, which is, by the way, still a problem today.
Yes, it is.
Were engaged in a major demonstration, and thousands of the students were on the Parkway that day, and they were supported by ministers from the Episcopal Diocese and some of the other churches and synagogues and other community religious organizations. And we had a police chief or captain, I can't remember what he was, named Rizzo, Frank Rizzo. And
I've heard
some
the
of
name.
you may have heard of him.
I've heard the name.
And that day we had the huge presence of police there on the Parkway. And they were charging the students. It was I considered it to be a police riot, I called it.
No. Okay.
But they, of course, won't agree. And they beat the children, and there was numerous arrests and major problems. And the city of Philadelphia School District went to court for an injunction to stop the kids from demonstrating further. And at that time, there was a lot of foment of civil rights going on in the country. The Black Power movement was getting started. The Black Panthers were there. There were Ku Klux Klan cross burnings in North Carolina, and there were a lot of problems.
Yeah.
Cecil Moore was one of the really great trial lawyers of Philadelphia, and he was head of the NAACP at the time, and they sued him because he was involved in organizing the group of students, and they also sued Bill Mathis, who was the head of the Congress of Racial Equality in Philadelphia. And I had worked with CORE quite a bit in helping. They were very active, as was the NAACP, in helping unions organize workers in our factories at that time. And, well, what happened is they're in the courtroom, and I was there, and Cecil got into a major fight with the city solicitor of Philly, a fellow named David Berger, and ended up getting kicked out of the courtroom.
Oh, my.
And, yeah, I could still see him today with his shark skin gray suit. And he used to be, he was a Marine. And and had been through some heavy-duty fighting here in Philly, getting Girard College to be integrated. You may remember that. And so the judge at the time, Judge Alex Barbieri, was a very bright judge, very intelligent. And he said, "Mr. Scheller, you're taking over here." I was already there on behalf of some of the kids.
Okay.
And we ended up settling this major conflagration, which went on for several days. Obviously, all the charges had to be dropped against the children. no discipline, I think, was ever meted out to the police that were involved. Of course, that it was very common in those days, even to some degree today. And the school district at that point began finally to establish a course framework for teaching African American history, to improve education and teaching in schools where there were large numbers of African American students, tried more to integrate them with other schools in the area and give them more attention. And that was the beginnings of, I think, Black history here in Philadelphia to a substantial extent. And that's 1967. Of course, as time goes on, the Black Power movement is there. And in 1970, we had the National Convention of the Black Panthers here. And at that time, there was Rizzo again raided the Black Panthers' offices. A number of the kids, they were using guns and everything, the police. I mean, it was very, very bad. And some of your listeners may recall newspapers and showing the Black Panthers stripped on the cover of the magazine. And I was brought in to represent them at the time. And I ultimately, they all got off. Funny story that came out of it at the time. There was a Chinese restaurant at 9th and Ray Street called South China. And nobody will believe this, but it's a true story. I'll tell it. What happened is I'm at the police roundhouse at the time, which is where the preliminary hearings are going on. And I had a huge fight with the judge there because they switched judges on me. They brought in this judge named Leo Weinrod. He proceeded to hold the kids on no bail. I proceeded to get a bunch of Episcopal priests and other ministers together, and we went to a Judge Tom Reed. He released them on bail. It was quite a fight. So I'm in the South China restaurant that night, and I open up my fortune cookie, and it said, "Beware of men in blue suits." It's a true story. And, of course, I had an IRS audit a few months later.
Amazing how who could predict, right? So was that your introduction to the movement?
I had gotten involved in law school because one group of the probationers and parolees were assigned to ministers, and one group just went to the regular probation and parole services. And it was a 2-year study, and we were comparing recidivism rates. And it was very obvious that those people in the justice system who had been charged with criminal conduct actually did very much better. There was no recidivism amongst the couple hundred that we had who were assigned to clergy. And the clergy at that time was very, very involved with our community.
Okay.
There's still some, as you know.
There's some, yeah.
You know, I'm on the board of the Salvation Army. I think they try to do a lot.
Yes.
And that's how I got involved. And when I graduated from the University of Pennsylvania Law School, one of the things I became aware of that was going on from the very beginning were the sale of freezer food plans, where the people were being told they were saving enough money on the freezers to pay for the food. Well, it was just a big scam. And they had what we called confession of judgment. Okay. Which was no court hearing. Your house could be sold, your car could be sold, and that was one of the first things I did to get that declared unconstitutional. And I had a law professor of mine named John Honnold from Penn Law, who was a Quaker, and he actually, this is after I graduated from law school, was working with me to get that declared unconstitutional. And then later on, we wanted to get students the right to register and vote on campus because that started up at Penn State, and we did get that right at the time. Okay. And then labor movements. I represented the union that had formed at Temple University at the time called the International Brotherhood of University Employees. And they were representing the janitors and maids, they were called at that time. Right. Maids, the only difference was maids, of course, were all women. Janitors were men, and the maids worked harder. But they were paid quite a bit less.
Quite a bit less.
And that was, and we began a lawsuit to get them equal pay, and that was one of the first cases in the United States history of equal pay for class action in this kind of background at Temple.
In those early days, of course, worked very closely with the Philadelphia icon Cecil B. Moore.
Right.
And what was that meeting like? In case listeners haven't picked up on it, and sometimes it's hard to tell, this happens not to be an African-American gentleman. So, and back in those days, it was very charged. There would be a lot, I would think, I know, and in my experience, sometimes there'd be a lot of suspicion, even when people have the best of intentions.
Yeah.
How were you received in that group?
Well, it was very interesting, to put it mildly. They were suspicious in the African American community, but I had a lot of friends, and I was also representing labor unions at the time that were organizing African Americans, so I was maybe had a greater level of trust. And there was an African American judge friend of mine, Bobby Williams, Raymond Pace Alexander, his wife Sadie. When I went to Penn undergrad, I had a friend, Jimmy DePriest. And Jimmy just passed away in the last few days. He was one of our Marian Anderson's nephew, and we were actually fraternity brothers.
Really?
And we used to have, we were in the Penn band, and unfortunately he passed away recently. So I had a lot of connections to the community already, particularly through the recidivism study I did at Penn when I was an undergrad at the University of Pennsylvania. So I was sort of trusted, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. And fortunately, you had some of those personal connects. And for lack of a better phrase, some of these folks could sort of vouch for you whenever some suspicion would come along. Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah, well, I recall the Black Panther convention. I was there part of the time. And the guy, a lot of the kids, I call them kids. They were a lot of them were kids, and I was friends with a lot of them, and a lot of them, we just got along, and and I was involved with other civil rights. I didn't consider myself a civil rights leader or lawyer. I just never thought of it that way. I just did what I did because it was the right thing to do.
Doing the right thing, sure.
And I don't believe in the term pro bono. Today, which means doing. I believe you do what's right. You know what's right, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand what the right thing to do in most instances.
Sure.
And it's like the Salvation Army motto: doing the most good.
The most good. That's right.
And we kind of know, and that's the direction. And I never really thought about money or anything like that. It just, frankly, God kind of brought it to me. And I don't call funding new things. Or right now we have a foundation called the Scheller Family Foundation, and my wife is very active in the community also.
Okay.
And we just gave Temple University $1.5 million to fund a new social justice center.
Fantastic.
And we gave Drexel University and $1,100,000 a commitment for their 11th Street Health Center, which is a new model for the country for health care, and run by nurse practitioners. It has dental services, social services. We have a board of teenagers as well as adults from the community, and the nurses go into the homes to help in pregnancy and diabetes. It's under the new health care law, which is going into effect. This, I believe, will really be a model for the country. You don't have to go to the emergency room.
I was going to ask,
you don't need an appointment. You come in and you're followed. They have healthy diets for you, and they teach you how to cook. They have exercise, and it's being expanded. That's what we're trying to do right now. It really has become extremely popular in the community because the community trusts what is happening there. You just don't go in and see a doctor who sees you for 10 minutes, gives you some pills, and shunts you off until And it's been very, very successful. It started out as a pilot project, and in my opinion, this is the future of healthcare for a lot of us, for most of us, in fact. I can tell you this much: you get very, very good health care. The emergency rooms are good, but you're lost. You go to the emergency room, and maybe you get admitted, but you're also going there. People go there to be treated for cold. It's very expensive.
Sure.
This saves taxpayers and a ton of money, and and it also provides a higher quality of health care. And I've met some of the patients there. And I've gone out of my way to support it. I'm on the board of trustees at Drexel University, which runs the center. Drexel has the largest private medical school in the United States. It has
really didn't know that.
A huge nursing school. It has a nurse anesthetist. It trains one of the only public health schools in our region. It's very useful because the students get a chance to really be involved. The Drexel Law School, for example, twice a week has young law students and law faculty there helping people that want advice on it. And it's all centered in that center, which is going to be enlarged now with them, partially with the money that we're giving to them.
You're listening to Let's Talk About It here on Gospel Highway 11. I'm Walt Cooper, sitting in for Fred Blaine, and we're speaking with Attorney Stephen Scheller. And the legal center, is that pretty much an extension of what you've done in your own practice?
Yeah, the goal here with the Temple University Center for Social Justice is to really deal with the things that are wrong in our community and in our region and nationally. For example, we're going to be looking at our school systems. I want to understand how we can have Harriton High School and Lower Merion High School being built with huge numbers of dollars, sums, and yet we have, problems here in Philly.
Schools closing, or about to.
And I know one of my daughters who graduated from Temple was teaching here in Philly at in the Spring Garden School area, and she had a great opportunity, and the kids were great. If we have support for our teachers, and obviously she was paid less than had she worked in, say, Lower Merion or one of those school districts.
That commitment to social justice, was that birthed in you at a young age for you to have to pass on?
Funny story. Brought up in Brooklyn, and I went to a high school called Erasmus, and I used to play the flute, sax, clarinet, and actually wanted to go to Juilliard. My father was afraid I would be, he didn't want any musicians in the family.
Get a real job, right? Okay. Sort of like radio, but anyway, right.
Right, whatever it was. So he convinced me I wanted to go to Penn because they had a veterinary school and a great music program, so I combined both.
Right.
And I never became a veterinary medicine because I got a C in organic chemistry. And
that'll do it.
And luckily criminology was there, and I met Dr. Marvin Wolfgang and got involved with recidivism rates and social issues, and with our clergy here in Philly. And at the time, so I had no plans to be in the civil rights movement. I don't consider myself a civil rights lawyer, but if you ask around, most people would say he is. And people like Cecil Moore and I were friendly, Oscar Gaskins, Bobby Williams, Raymond Pace Alexander, Jimmy DePriest, and we just knew each other. And we had a cadre of white African Americans. We all traveled together. We were in a band together. We just kind of did things of that type, and it was the right thing to do.
Sure. That points to something that we've seen going back to, let's say, the Dr. King years. History writers have not really done a great service because it comes off looking like it was just a black thing, if you know what I mean. No. And there was diversity in the movement.
Huge diversity. I have to give credit to the Philadelphia clergy, to Dr. Paul Washington, Reverend. I don't know if you knew him, but he was the Episcopal head of the Church of the Advocate.
Okay.
At 18th and Diamond Street, and he and his wife Pauline, they were friends of mine. Of course, if there was a saint in this world, Paul Washington was one of them.
Wow.
He was amazing.
Yeah.
And he was like a mentor to me, as was Judge Alexander, and so I had this background. I don't know how you would describe it. It was very clear that there was discrimination in our school districts in the way kids were taught. I don't care whether you were black, white, or from a foreign country or what. It just wasn't right. And something had to be done about it. Now, something still has to be done about it to a significant degree, because we seem to be going backwards right now, and although President Obama is trying to turn things around. But in fact, the worst loss I ever had as a lawyer was Bush versus Gore. I don't know.
I saw that in an article here. I was wondering.
That's all tied together. What happened there, historically, my mother-in-law, my wife's mother, lived in Boca Raton, Florida, and it was Election Day 2000, and she called me up and said she was apoplectic, very upset, because she thought she voted for Buchanan.
Oh, wow. The old butterfly ballot thing.
And she started telling me about this butterfly ballot. I said, Mom, calm down. And Ed Rendell was the head of the DNC, Democratic National Committee at the time, and he and I were friendly from the Black Panther days, because he was on the, we were fighting with each other.
That's a whole nother interview. Okay.
Anyway, but I had helped students get the right to register and vote on campus. I had helped write the rules for the Democratic Party to make it more open and things like that. So I called Ed up. I said, I think we have a problem in Palm Beach County. My mother-in-law was telling me about this ballot. And Ed said, oh, your mother-in-law.
Right.
Anyway, so I guess it was about 4 a.m. in the morning, I get a call from Ed. And he said, I think you got something there. And he said, can you get something organized? Because Gore hadn't made any decision to do anything. Right. So I went down to Florida, got a couple of friends of mine who were lawyers in the area, and although we didn't make the movie, we filed the initial injunction barring Harris from certifying the Palm Beach County election. And I actually hold a record, I think, for judges withdrawing from a case because they conflicts of interest, 5 in 1 week.
Wow.
And we ended up with a Cuban-American judge who headed the Cuban-American Club of Palm Beach County, but he did the right thing. He ordered the recount because Harris wasn't going to be doing it. Then finally,
and as I remember, wasn't she was the Secretary of State and the one that would
Florida,
certify the elections and all of that?
She just wanted to. And then we began to learn about a whole bunch of other problems going on. But then Gore got involved and brought in some other lawyers who came from big firms and all this kind of stuff, which is fine. But they decided they wanted to move the case to Tallahassee, which I didn't think was a great idea, but I had no control over that. And that's where it got bollocksed up a bit. Right. And what happened was we're going on with the litigation, and the University of Pennsylvania Law School, where I went to law school, had its 150th anniversary that year. And they had a speaker, Sandra Day O'Connor. If you recall, she was the vote that put Bush in.
Really?
And here she was extolling, this is before the Supreme Court had issued its decision and before all that, while that is pending. And this is in, late November, I think it was. And I'm at the speech, and a fire alarm rings, and she goes charging out in front of everybody. There was no fire alarm went off.
Okay.
And, of course, she extolled the virtues of women lawyers, because that was big thing.
Sure.
And I have two girls that are lawyers, two women, and my daughters. And that ended up being my worst loss ever. I should have fought harder. And it was scary at times because I'm outside the Palm Beach County Courthouse waiting to get in. We had Jesse Jackson's group coming down one side, the rednecks coming in the other. There were police with all these equipment and soldiers and helicopters, and we're trying to get in the courthouse. At that point, it was almost trying to escape before what could be a major fight. But that was one of our heavy involvements. But Gore actually won that election by close to 100,000 votes.
Yeah, by popular vote. Absolutely.
In Florida.
Oh, that was just in Florida.
Just in Florida.
Okay.
No question about it. That election was stolen from him, in my view. Now, you can argue with me from now to doomsday, but I'm telling you, I know the facts.
What would be your most satisfying victory, do you think, if you could pick one? It looks like you've had a bunch of great ones, and if you could pick one.
It's hard to pick one. recovering billions of dollars for the taxpayers and the government and exposing the drug industry, which I'm still vigorously fighting against now for the public. It's a big victory.
Yeah.
And I hope to see some of the CEOs in jail in the next few years, getting equal pay for maids, as they were called, and their title changed. It's hard to call one better, more important than the other. They were all pretty important.
And one thing that gets me, you're talking about some things that are going on even now or recent history, and people many times, maybe unknowingly, speak of fights for social justice, civil rights, whatever you want to call it, as sort of a thing of the past, and we've gone beyond all that now. Just from the chuckle, I can tell you.
Right now,
you and I both disagree with that.
Yeah, right
what
now.
What do you see coming up in the future in those areas?
Well, I think our school systems are a mess.
Yeah.
And the discrimination, financial discrimination, or whatever you want to call it, that goes on has to be changed. We have to provide health care for the millions of people that aren't getting it and don't have the ability to fund it. We have to really put an end to greed as the motive, the money-making goals of our society. They've subsumed common sense.
Yeah.
I always say that the best thing the drug industry could do is develop a pill to diminish their own greed impulses.
Wow.
But that's the big problem right now, our greed and we can't just focus on making money and yes, we have competition. We can't change human nature, but there has to be a much better balance. Yeah. And that's what and we have to provide the ability for people to compete fairly. Yeah. We have to provide them with a justice system that is fairly treats them and doesn't make it impossible for them to get a hearing because it's so expensive. Right now, the only people who can really afford lawyers are the very wealthy and the companies, and if you're very poor, you can get legal services. But I would call it our vast middle class or our vast average American citizen. Whether you work in McDonald's, whether you work in Boeing, you can't get true justice if you can't afford to have somebody represent you and explain things to you, and you can't get access to our court system fairly. And that's one of the things we're going to be examining at Temple University's social justice system.
And the various struggles and fights continue, and I, for one, and I'm sure the listeners are glad we have good soldiers like yourself in the midst of it.
Well, we want to develop the young people now,
willing to pass it along to future generations. Yeah. Absolutely. Attorney Stephen Scheller, thank you so much for sharing just a small piece of your experiences through Philadelphia history and present and hopefully future. And as we continue on in Black History Month, what we're talking about goes far beyond that, but definitely has a place, has a center in there.
Right. For those kids taking Black history now in our high schools and colleges, they should look back at the year 1967 and Cecil Moore and Oscar Gaskins and Bobby Williams and Raymond Pace Alexander and Judge Barbieri. That wouldn't have probably, well, I guess it may have happened, I don't know, but they had a lot to do with what's happening, and that's why we have Cecil B. Moore Avenue, and we recognize his what he's done for us.
And folks can learn a lot from going on to your website there as well to get a lot more. As I remember, is it Scheller.com?
Right.
Right, and it's SHELLER.com. Right. Anything in closing that you'd like to pass along just for folks to think about as we are in the midst of course, this Black History Month? I mean, you've shared something great just now about thinking back to that year, but any other sort of parting shot there?
I think the main thing I would say is don't lose faith, and remember to honor those in the past who made the way for you, whether it was Abraham Lincoln, Cecil Moore, or Franklin Roosevelt, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama. Support them, help them. That's very important. ignore getting involved. Make sure you're registered to vote. Make sure you come out and vote. Make sure everybody you know gets out and votes, because we got a lot to do. And right now the fight is about guns in the street and our schools and our justice system. Those are the three of the most important things. Make the justice system fair and available, and of course the health system, not just for people who have $13,000 a year to have private insurance.
And with that, once again, we thank you, Attorney Stephen Scheller, and we're going to have to invite you back sometime, because I know there's a whole lot more that you could share about what has transpired and looking forward with the ventures that you have. We thank you so much for being on Let's Talk About It.
Thank you very much, and it's nice being here.